to think about collaboration, resilience, finding your true self, and we do this in various ways. But nothing better than really sort of taking that example of what the charity stands for and making some fantastic individuals, 25 to be exact, abseil from the top of the Empire State Building. This is the first time this challenge has happened, and it's phenomenal to be a partner of this.
Princess Beatrice collapsed in tears when the DNA results came back. What she discovered about her real father left the entire royal family in absolute shock. For 36 years, she lived a complete lie. But when a deadly illness sent her to the hospital, a routine medical test exposed a secret so dark, so unthinkable, that it destroyed everything she thought she knew. Her parents begged her to stop digging. The palace tried to silence her, but what she found out next will leave you speechless. You won't believe who her real father actually is.
I think that education now, when you've got a lot of young people that are focusing on just getting things perfect for a test and absolutely not being able to have that moment of expression that comes from a study around lifelong learning, and actually what skills-based learning really looks like, we are going to get into ourselves in a very difficult situation. So I'm really excited with all the work that's going on now with a few different organizations across the world to really think through what is skills-based learning and what are the skills that
Princess Beatrice has always been vocal about her personal connection to dyslexia. As someone who has lived with the learning difference herself, she understands the challenges young people face in the classroom. She has spoken publicly about the need to change how educators approach students with dyslexia, emphasizing that the narrative needs to shift from one of limitation to one of different thinking styles. Her advocacy work has touched many families dealing with similar struggles, and she has used her platform to bring attention to this often misunderstood condition. But on a Wednesday morning in May 2025, Beatrice found herself at the center of a completely different kind of attention. The story that broke that day had nothing to do with education or advocacy. Instead, it threatened to unravel everything she thought she knew about her own identity. The news spread quickly across the country. By the time most people were having their morning coffee, the headlines were already everywhere. Newspapers, television broadcasts, and social media platforms all carried the same shocking claim. According to reports circulating that morning, Princess Beatrice, the eldest daughter of Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, had been adopted. The story suggested that her entire family history, the lineage she had grown up believing was hers, might not be what it seemed. For the royal family, this was more than just another tabloid rumor. The House of Windsor has weathered many storms over the decades, but this particular scandal hit especially close to home for one branch of the family tree. Prince Andrew and his former wife Sarah were reportedly deeply troubled by the allegations. But no one was more affected than Beatrice herself, the person at the very heart of the story. At 36 years old, Beatrice had built a life of her own. She was a wife, a mother to her young daughter Sienna Elizabeth, and had established herself as an independent woman with her own career and charitable interests. Everything in her world had seemed settled and secure. She had her routines, her family commitments, and her sense of place within the larger royal structure. The news that morning shattered that sense of stability in an instant. The implications were staggering. If there was any truth to the report, it would mean that the foundation of her entire existence had been built on a lie. Her childhood memories, her sense of belonging, her understanding of where she came from and who she was connected to, all of it would be called into question. For anyone, such a revelation would be devastating. For someone in the public eye, with their life documented and scrutinized since birth, the impact was even more profound. The media frenzy began almost immediately. By sunrise, every major news outlet was running the story. Radio programs discussed it between their regular segments. Television news channels brought in royal commentators to analyze what this could mean for the family. Online, the reaction was swift and overwhelming. Social media platforms filled with speculation, arguments, and countless theories about how such a thing could have happened or whether it was true at all. Outside the royal residences, crowds began to gather. Some were curious onlookers hoping to catch a glimpse of any activity. Others were journalists and photographers, cameras ready, waiting for someone to emerge with a statement or at least a reaction. The gates remained closed and security personnel kept everyone at a distance, but the presence of so many people only added to the pressure building inside. What made the situation more complicated was the silence from the palace. In situations like these, the public expects some kind of response, even if it's just a brief denial or a statement saying the family will address the matter in due course. But none came. The official channels remained quiet, and that silence created a vacuum that was quickly filled with even more questions and speculation. People wanted to know where the story had originated. Who had brought this information forward? Was there any evidence to support such a serious claim? Why hadn't anyone from the family spoken up to deny it immediately? The longer the silence lasted, the more people began to wonder if there might be some truth to it after all. The report itself claimed to have insider knowledge. While no specific sources were named, the Salmaya the Fawcett language used suggested that the information had come from people close to the family. This added a layer of credibility in the minds of many readers, even though there was no way to verify these anonymous sources. The suggestion alone was enough to keep the story alive and growing. That morning, Beatrice was not sitting quietly and waiting for things to blow over. According to those who observed her that day, she was visibly agitated. She moved through her home with obvious frustration, unable to settle or focus on anything for more than a moment. She would pick up her phone, look at the screen as notifications continued to pile up, and then set it back down without responding to any of them. She pulled open drawers, glanced at papers, and closed them again without really processing what she was looking at. At one point, she walked to the window and pulled back the curtains to look outside. The sight of her was overwhelming. Reporters lined the street beyond her gate, cameras trained on the house. The moment her figure appeared behind the glass, several of them turned in her direction, ready to capture any movement or expression. She quickly pulled the curtains shut again and stepped back from the window. Throughout the morning, members of her household staff moved quietly through the rooms, but no one had answers for her. Phone calls came in, but they brought more questions rather than clarity. The tension in the house was palpable. Even the walls, decorated with family portraits and photographs spanning generations, seemed to offer no comfort. The images that once represented continuity and belonging now felt like silent witnesses to an unfolding crisis. Beatrice knew she couldn't simply wait for answers to appear. She needed to hear the truth directly from the people who would know it best. She reached for her phone again, this time with purpose, and scrolled through her contacts until she found her mother's name. She pressed the call button and waited as it rang. When Sarah answered, Beatrice's voice was tight with emotion. The conversation was brief but intense. She asked her mother directly if she had seen the news. Sarah confirmed that she had. Beatrice pressed further, asking what it all meant and demanding to know if there was any truth to what was being reported. She needed to hear her mother say it wasn't true. There was a pause on the other end of the line before Sarah responded. Her voice was calm but carried a weight that suggested she understood the seriousness of the situation. She tried to reassure her daughter, telling her not to let the press frighten her. She reminded Beatrice how the media operates, how they sometimes invent stories or blow things out of proportion to create a scandal. Sarah suggested that this was just another example of that pattern, nothing more than fabrication designed to sell newspapers and generate clicks. But the words, though meant to comfort, didn't have the intended effect. They sounded too rehearsed, too careful. For Beatrice, they weren't strong enough to stand up against the storm raging outside her door and inside her mind. After ending the call, she stood for a moment, trying to decide what to do next. Talking on the phone wasn't enough. She needed to see her parents face to face, to look them in the eye and hear them tell her the truth in person. She made her decision quickly. Moving to the back of the house to avoid the reporters stationed at the front entrance, Beatrice slipped out through the garden. She got into her car and drove away, leaving the media crowd behind without them even realizing she had gone. Her destination was Windsor, where her parents were staying. She hoped that there, away from the cameras and the noise, she would finally get the answers she desperately needed. When Beatrice arrived at her parents' home in Windsor, she was struck by how different the scene was from what she had left behind at her own residence. There were no reporters camped outside, no cameras pointed at the entrance, no crowds of curious onlookers hoping to catch a glimpse of someone emerging from the property. The grounds were quiet, protected by security, but otherwise peaceful. Her parents had clearly taken steps to ensure their privacy was maintained during this difficult time. She parked and made her way inside quickly. The familiar surroundings of the house where she had spent so much time over the years now felt somehow different, charged with the weight of unanswered questions. She moved through the hallway and found her parents waiting in the dining room. They had clearly been expecting her call or visit. Both of them were seated at the table, and the atmosphere in the room was tense, despite the calm exterior. Beatrice didn't waste any time with pleasantries or small talk. She had come for answers, and she wanted them immediately. Standing before her parents, she asked the question that had been building inside her since the moment she first saw the headlines that morning. Her voice was sharp and direct as she demanded to know who she really was. The question hung in the air for what felt like an eternity. Her father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his usual composure visibly shaken. Her mother sat very still, her hands pressed together, her eyes fixed on her daughter's face. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. Finally, Sarah spoke. Her voice was firm and clear as she told Beatrice exactly what she needed to hear. She said that Beatrice was their daughter, their first child, and that this fact had never been in question. She emphasized that Beatrice's identity as their daughter was not something that could be disputed or taken away by rumors and media speculation. Prince Andrew nodded in agreement, his voice steady as he reinforced what his former wife had just said. He told Beatrice directly that she should not allow anyone, especially not tabloid journalists and anonymous sources, to tell her otherwise. The conviction in his voice seemed genuine, and he maintained eye contact with his daughter as he spoke. But Beatrice was not satisfied with simple reassurances. She pressed further, asking about the stories that were circulating, the rumors that seemed to have come from somewhere. She wanted to know how she could be certain of her identity when so many people were questioning it. She needed more than just words, more than just her parents telling her what she wanted to hear. She needed something concrete, something she could hold on to. Understanding that her daughter required more than verbal reassurance, Sarah stood up from the table and left the room. When she returned a few minutes later, she was carrying an old box. The box itself showed signs of age, its corners worn and its surface slightly faded. She placed it carefully on the table in front of Beatrice and opened the lid. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, spanning the early years of Beatrice's life. The images were yellowed at the edges, some of them slightly faded from time. But they had been preserved with obvious care. Sarah began lifting them out one by one, showing them to her daughter. There were pictures of Beatrice as a baby, tiny and wrapped in blankets. There were photos of her taking her first steps, her small hands reaching out for support. There were images of her in her first school uniform, smiling at the camera with the innocent enthusiasm of a young child. Sarah's voice was gentle but insistent as she pointed out each photograph. She told Beatrice to look at these images, to remember these moments. These were not fabrications or staged photographs meant to create a false narrative. These were real memories, documented moments from a real childhood. This was her life, captured in pictures that had been kept and treasured over the decades. Her mother's next words were perhaps the most important of the entire conversation. Sarah looked directly at her daughter and stated clearly that they had never lied to her and that they never would. It was a simple statement, but delivered with such conviction that it carried significant weight. Prince Andrew added his own reassurance to the conversation. His voice was quieter now, less formal than it had been moments before. He told Beatrice that they loved her, and that this love was the fundamental truth that mattered most. Everything else, all the speculation and rumors and media frenzy, was secondary to that basic fact. The photographs seemed to have an effect. As Beatrice looked through them, handling the images carefully, something in her posture began to shift. The tension that had been so visible when she first arrived started to ease. The evidence before her eyes, combined with her parents' direct and unwavering statements, began to quiet some of the doubt that had been consuming her since that morning. She spent several hours at Windsor that day. The time was not filled with constant conversation or dramatic declarations. Instead, it was a quieter experience, with Beatrice sitting with her parents, looking through more photographs, and simply being present with the people who had raised her. The familiarity of the setting, the shared memories represented in those old pictures, and the steady presence of her parents all contributed to a gradual calming of the storm that had been raging inside her. By the time Beatrice prepared to leave, the weight that had been pressing down on her shoulders seemed to have lifted somewhat. She felt calmer than she had all day, more centered and less consumed by the questions that had been tormenting her. The visit had given her what she came for, a sense of reassurance and connection that phone calls and text messages could never provide. When she drove away from Windsor and headed back to her own home, she felt different than she had on the drive there. The panic and fury that had propelled her to make that journey had been replaced by something closer to peace. She believed what her parents had told her. She trusted in the evidence of those photographs and the memories they represented. The media storm might still be raging outside, but inside herself, she felt she had found solid ground again. Arriving back at her home, she noticed that the reporters were still stationed outside her gate. They had been there for hours, waiting patiently for any development or statement. This time, however, Beatrice did not hide or slip past them through a back entrance. Instead, she faced them directly. She gave a brief wave as she drove through the gate, acknowledging their presence without stopping to answer any of their shouted questions. Then she went inside and the door closed behind her. The silence of her house felt different now. It was no longer oppressive or heavy with unanswered questions. It was simply quiet, the normal quiet of a home where life could continue. Beatrice returned to her regular activities, attending to the tasks and responsibilities that had been waiting for her attention. That same afternoon, she went to pick up her daughter from school. It was a routine she had performed countless times before, but on this particular day, it carried additional significance. Standing at the school gates, she smiled and chatted with other parents, acting as though nothing unusual had happened. When Sienna Elizabeth came running out to meet her, Beatrice gathered her daughter up with obvious affection, holding her close before they walked back to the car together. To anyone watching, it appeared that Princess Beatrice's world had not been shaken at all. As days turned into weeks, the intensity of the media coverage began to diminish. New stories emerged to capture public attention, and the scandal that had seemed so explosive that Wednesday morning gradually faded from the headlines. Some newspapers published follow-up articles calling the adoption claims false or unsubstantiated. Commentators and royal experts who had initially speculated about the story's credibility began to distance themselves from it, suggesting it had been nothing more than baseless gossip all along. Even Beatrice herself grew more confident in her identity and her place within her family. The doubt that had plagued her that morning became a distant memory, something she had overcome and moved past. Life returned to normal, or at least to what passed for normal in the world of royal duties and public scrutiny. She attended events, fulfilled her obligations, and continued her advocacy work. The photographs her mother had shown her remained a touchstone in her mind, evidence of a childhood and a family connection that no rumor could erase. For a brief period, it seemed as though the entire episode had been nothing more than a momentary crisis, successfully weathered and put behind them. Peace had settled over the household once again. Beatrice felt secure in who she was and where she belonged. The storm had passed, and calm, waters stretched ahead. But what none of them could have predicted was that another storm was gathering on the horizon, one that would bring with it a truth that no photograph or reassuring word could change. Approximately 1 month after the adoption scandal had faded from public attention, Beatrice began to feel unwell. At first, she dismissed it as nothing serious, just a slight fever that would probably resolve itself within a day or two. She told herself and those around her that it was merely a minor illness, the kind that everyone experiences from time to time. She expected to wake up the next morning feeling better. But the fever persisted. Instead of improving, it continued into the following day and then the day after that. What had started as a mild discomfort gradually became more concerning. Alongside the fever, Beatrice developed a constant headache that refused to go away no matter what she tried. Her face began to look pale, and she noticed that her usual energy levels had dropped significantly. Simple tasks that she normally accomplished without thought now left her feeling exhausted. Her husband, Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi, noticed the changes in her condition quickly. He watched as she grew weaker day by day, and his concern deepened with each passing evening. One night, as Beatrice sat on the sofa with a cool cloth pressed against her forehead, Eduardo stood by the window and spoke his mind. He told her directly that this was not just ordinary tiredness or a simple bug that would pass on its own. She needed to see a doctor. Beatrice shook her head and managed a faint smile, trying to downplay her symptoms. She insisted that she was fine and that it was just a small fever that would clear up soon. She did not want to make a fuss or waste a doctor's time over what she still believed was a minor illness. But Eduardo was not convinced. He pointed out that she had been saying the same thing for a week now, and nothing had improved. The fever had not broken, and the headache had not eased. If anything, she seemed to be getting worse rather than better. Beatrice tried once more to insist that it was nothing serious, that she just needed a bit more rest and time. The headache continued to worsen throughout that week. By the end of it, her fever still had not subsided, and she found herself lying down more frequently than she was standing or moving about. The pain behind her eyes had grown sharper and more persistent, making it difficult to concentrate on anything. Eduardo had reached his limit of patience, with waiting and hoping things would improve on their own. On a grey morning near the end of that week, he walked into the bedroom where Beatrice was resting and told her in a firm tone that they were going to the hospital. There was no room for negotiation in his voice. When Beatrice tried to protest, saying she did not want to go, Eduardo interrupted her. He made it clear that he was not asking for her permission or opinion on the matter. They were going that day, and that was final. He explained his reasoning clearly. She had been burning with fever for over a week. She could barely stand without becoming dizzy and weak. The headache was not going away on its own. He was not willing to risk her health any longer by waiting and hoping for improvement. After a long pause, during which Beatrice seemed to recognize that further argument would be pointless, she sighed and agreed to go. Eduardo helped her dress slowly and carefully, taking his time to ensure she was comfortable. Their young daughter, Sienna Elizabeth, joined them for the trip to the hospital, sitting quietly in the back seat of the car. The drive was steady and relatively quiet, with Eduardo focused on getting them there safely while occasionally reaching over to rest his hand on Beatrice's, offering silent reassurance. They arrived at the London Clinic, a private medical facility that has long been used by members of the royal family for their healthcare needs. The entrance was discreet and well protected from public view and cameras. The staff inside were clearly expecting them and ready to provide immediate attention. Beatrice was admitted quickly, and the process moved forward without delay. Eduardo spoke directly with the attending physician, a doctor named Carter, who met them in a private consultation room. He explained his wife's symptoms in detail, describing how she had been unwell for more than a week with a persistent fever that would not break. He mentioned the constant headaches and her overall weakness, and he expressed frustration that he had tried to bring her in sooner, but she had insisted it would pass on its own. Dr. Carter listened carefully, taking notes as Eduardo spoke. His demeanor was calm and measured, the kind of professional composure that comes from years of experience. When Eduardo finished explaining the situation, the doctor acknowledged that these symptoms could point to several different conditions. It might be a prolonged viral infection of some kind, or possibly something affecting her immune system's ability to function properly. However, he was clear that they could not be certain of anything until proper tests were conducted. He turned to Beatrice and spoke to her directly, his tone gentle and reassuring. He explained that they would begin with basic blood work to get an initial picture of what was happening inside her body. Depending on what those results showed, they would then proceed to more detailed analysis if necessary. He emphasized the importance of checking for any underlying condition that might be causing her symptoms. Beatrice gave a small nod, her voice quiet as she agreed to the testing. Shortly after the consultation ended, nurses entered the room to take her vital signs and prepare her for the initial examinations. Her temperature was recorded and blood samples were drawn for laboratory analysis. She was then taken to a private ward where she would remain, under observation while they waited for results. Eduardo stayed by her side throughout the process, keeping their daughter close and speaking to her in quiet, reassuring tones. The hours that followed stretched out slowly as they waited. Medical staff moved in and out of the room regularly, checking on Beatrice, asking questions about how she was feeling, and noting her responses in their charts. The tests had been completed, and now there was nothing to do but wait for the laboratory to process the samples and provide results. For the first time since her illness had begun, Beatrice was in a place where answers could be found. The uncertainty that had coloured the past week was about to be replaced with concrete medical information. When the results finally came back, they brought news that was far more serious than anyone had anticipated. Dr. Carter returned to Beatrice's room carrying a file with the laboratory findings. His expression was heavier than it had been during their first meeting, and his demeanor suggested that what he had to share was not simple or straightforward. He explained that her blood counts were significantly lower than they should be. The test showed that she was experiencing a condition where her red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets were all below normal levels. This pattern indicated that her bone marrow, the tissue inside her bones responsible for producing these vital blood cells, was not functioning as it should. Eduardo, who had been standing near the window, turned sharply and asked the doctor to explain what that meant in simpler terms. Dr. Carter chose his words carefully as he provided a clearer picture. He explained that Beatrice's bone marrow, which was supposed to be continuously producing healthy blood cells to keep her body functioning properly, was failing to do its job. This was why she had been experiencing fever, unusual bruising, and overwhelming fatigue. The marrow was suppressed, and this could indicate a serious condition such as aplastic anemia or another type of marrow failure syndrome. The words hit the room with considerable force. Eduardo repeated the term bone marrow in disbelief, his voice sharp with shock. Beatrice, lying weakly on the hospital bed, turned her head toward the doctor with confusion and fear visible in her eyes. Her lips trembled as she tried to understand how this could be happening to her. She voiced the question that many people in her situation would ask. She wanted to know how it was possible for her to have such a serious condition when she had always taken care of herself. She ate well, exercised regularly, did not drink excessively, and had never smoked. She was still only in her 30s. How could her bone marrow be failing when she had done everything right? Seeing the fear and confusion in both of their faces, Dr. Carter moved closer to the bed. He pulled a chair forward and sat down, leaning in so that he could speak to them more directly. His tone became softer and more reassuring as he acknowledged how frightening this diagnosis must sound. He wanted them to understand something very important, that this was not a death sentence. He explained that bone marrow failure was indeed a serious condition, but it was also treatable. Many patients had recovered fully with the appropriate medical care. He emphasized that Beatrice was young and otherwise healthy, which were significant factors in her favor. Her age and general fitness before this illness developed would work to her advantage during treatment. Dr. Carter reached out and took Beatrice's hand gently. He then rested his other hand on Eduardo's shoulder, making physical contact to reinforce his message of hope and support. He told them clearly and directly that this diagnosis did not mean Beatrice was going to die. What it meant was that they needed to take action, and they needed to do it promptly. The next step in her treatment would require finding a compatible donor for a bone marrow transplant. The doctor explained that with a good match, Beatrice's failing marrow could be replaced with healthy stem cells from a donor. These new cells would then take over the job of producing blood cells, and her body would have the opportunity to recover and function normally again. Beatrice blinked back tears, still processing the shock of what she had just learned. She asked about finding a donor, her voice uncertain. Dr. Carter nodded and provided more information about the process. He explained that one of the most reliable places to find a compatible donor was within a patient's own family. Parents and siblings were typically tested first because their genetic markers offered the highest probability of compatibility. He told them that blood samples would need to be collected from her parents so that testing could be performed. The laboratory would analyze specific genetic markers to determine whether either of her parents could serve as a suitable donor. He tried to offer reassurance, suggesting that family members often provided successful matches. The room fell into silence once again as the weight of this information settled over everyone present. Beatrice's breathing was shallow and quick as she struggled to absorb everything the doctor had told her. Eduardo reached for her hand and squeezed it tightly, as if trying to anchor her to the present moment and keep her from being swept away by fear. Dr. Carter stood up from his chair and spoke again about the immediate next steps. He said he would arrange for the compatibility testing to begin as soon as possible. Beatrice's parents would need to come to the hospital so that samples could be collected from them. The sooner they knew whether either parent was a match, the sooner treatment could begin. Beatrice gave a slow nod, her voice barely more than a whisper as she agreed. That evening, Eduardo made the necessary phone calls to her parents, explaining what the doctors had discovered, and what they needed from them. His tone was steady but carried the urgency of the situation. When he told them about Beatrice's diagnosis and the need for donor testing, both Prince Andrew and Sarah were shocked by the news. Despite their shock, they agreed immediately to come to the hospital. There was no hesitation or delay in their response. They promised to be there by the following morning, ready to do whatever was necessary to help their daughter. The next day, the hospital made arrangements for Prince Andrew and Sarah to arrive through a private entrance. Given the ongoing public interest in the royal family, discretion remained essential. Security personnel guided them through a back corridor, carefully shielding them from the cameras that continued their vigil outside the main entrance of the London clinic. When they entered Beatrice's hospital room, the atmosphere immediately became charged with emotion and unspoken worry. Sarah moved first, her focus entirely on her daughter, who lay weakly against the pillows. She crossed to the bedside quickly, taking Beatrice's hand and pressing it to her lips. She spoke softly, reassuring words meant to comfort, telling Beatrice not to worry because they were there now and everything would be all right. Prince Andrew followed behind, maintaining his characteristic composure, though his eyes revealed the depth of his concern. He acknowledged Edoardo with a brief nod before turning his attention to Beatrice. He tried to offer reassurance in his own way, telling her firmly that she would be fine and that this was simply another challenge to overcome. "Storms always pass," he said, attempting to project confidence that this situation would be no different. A nurse entered the room shortly afterward, carrying the necessary equipment for the blood collection. She explained the procedure politely and thoroughly, making sure everyone understood what would happen. A few vials of blood would be collected from each parent and sent to the laboratory for testing. The tests would analyze specific genetic markers known as HLA proteins to determine compatibility for transplant purposes. Sarah volunteered to go first without hesitation. She rolled up her sleeve while the nurse prepared her arm, tying an elastic band to make the veins more visible. As the nurse worked, Sarah looked across the bed at her daughter and managed an encouraging smile, commenting that it was nothing to worry about, just a small pinch. The needle entered her arm smoothly and the vial began filling with dark red blood. Sarah maintained her composure throughout, barely flinching. Prince Andrew went next, taking his place in the chair the nurse indicated. He sat silently as she prepared his arm in the same manner. When the needle pierced his skin, he winced only slightly, keeping his gaze fixed on the wall rather than watching the procedure. Within a few minutes, his samples had also been collected, sealed properly, and labelled with his information. The nurse thanked them both for their cooperation and gathered the vials carefully. She explained that these samples would be sent to the laboratory immediately for analysis. They could expect preliminary results within 2 to 3 days, though she cautioned that sometimes the process could take slightly longer depending on various factors. As she left the room, a heavy silence settled over the small group gathered around Beatrice's bedside. Beatrice looked at her parents with exhausted eyes and apologized for putting them through this ordeal. Sarah immediately leaned forward, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead, and told her firmly that there was no need for apologies. Beatrice was their daughter, and there was nothing they would not do for her. Prince Andrew nodded his agreement, his voice steady as he reinforced that this was what family did. Family members stood together and supported one another through difficult times. Dr. Carter returned briefly to express his gratitude for their prompt cooperation. He explained that beginning with family testing gave them the best statistical chance of finding a compatible match. He also wanted to prepare them for various possible outcomes. Whatever the results showed, he assured them they would continue searching until a suitable donor was found. If family members did not prove compatible, there were international registries containing millions of potential donors, as well as cord blood banks and other options they could explore. Beatrice closed her eyes and exhaled slowly, as if trying to physically hold on to the hope contained in those words. That evening, after her parents had left the clinic, the ward grew quieter. Edoardo remained at her side as the machines around them maintained their steady rhythm. The waiting had begun. 3 days later, Dr. Carter returned carrying a thick file. This time his expression was more guarded, his steps slower and more deliberate. Edoardo stood up, quickly, his hand instinctively tightening around Beatrice's. Even before the doctor spoke, something in his demeanour suggested difficult news. Dr. Carter began gently, telling Beatrice they had received the compatibility test results. The test showed no genetic match. Neither Prince Andrew nor Sarah was compatible as a donor for the transplant she needed. Complete silence filled the room for what felt like an eternity. Beatrice blinked several times, stammering that she did not understand how that was possible. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth in shock. Prince Andrew's eyes narrowed, his posture stiffening. Eduardo shook his head sharply and suggested there must have been some mistake, urging the doctor to retest the samples. Dr. Carter's voice remained calm as he explained they always ran confirmation checks to ensure accuracy. The samples from both parents had been tested twice using standard protocols, and the results were identical both times. He stressed an important point. That lack of donor compatibility did not automatically indicate lack of biological relationship, as compatibility depended on very specific genetic markers. However, the fact remained that neither parent could serve as her donor. Prince Andrew asked firmly about alternatives. Dr. Carter explained they would expand their search significantly to international registries and cord blood banks. Beatrice was not without options, he reassured them. The following days became a blur of waiting and additional monitoring. The atmosphere during her parents' subsequent visits had changed noticeably, their faces appearing strained under the weight of unanswered questions. Finally, Dr. Carter returned with a flicker of relief in his eyes. They had found a suitable donor through the International Bone Marrow Registry. The donor was an anonymous volunteer named Grace Thompson, and the compatibility match was strong. They could proceed immediately. Beatrice exhaled deeply, tears welling in her eyes, but this time carrying relief mixed with the emotion. The transplant was scheduled for the next day. Early that morning, doctors collected stem cells from Mrs. Thompson through a process that took several hours. These cells were then carefully prepared for transfer. When the intravenous line was connected and the donor cells began flowing into Beatrice's bloodstream, the procedure looked deceptively simple. Within hours, it was complete. Dr. Carter confirmed everything had gone smoothly, and now they would wait for the new cells to do their work. The following days brought careful monitoring. Beatrice experienced weakness and occasional nausea, which were expected side effects. But gradually, her spirit grew stronger even as her body worked to heal. Nurses checked her blood counts daily, looking for signs of successful engraftment. Within 2 weeks, results showed steady improvement. Her bruising faded, her skin regained its natural color, and her energy slowly returned. Acceptance. Carter smiled genuinely as he announced her body had accepted the transplant. She was healing. But even with successful physical recovery, Beatrice could not find peace of mind. The doctor's explanation about donor mismatch kept replaying in her thoughts, combined with the old adoption rumors she had tried so hard to dismiss. Late one evening, she asked to speak privately with Dr. Carter. Her voice was firm despite its tremor as she told him she wanted the truth and asked directly if he could run a DNA test. Dr. Carter hesitated, explaining it would require parental consent and raise significant ethical concerns. But Beatrice pressed insistently, her voice low but unyielding. She needed this information for herself, for her own sense of identity. After considerable persuasion, the doctor reluctantly agreed, noting that her parents' blood samples were still available in the laboratory from the compatibility testing. 2 days later, Dr. Carter returned with a sealed envelope, his expression somber. When Beatrice opened it and read through the technical language and genetic markers, the conclusion was unmistakable. There was no biological match between her and either of the people she had called her parents for 36 years. That evening, Beatrice summoned her parents to the hospital. When they arrived, uncertain why she had requested their urgent presence, they found her sitting up in bed with the envelope trembling in her hand. She looked directly at both of them and asked who she really was. Before they could respond with reassurances, she told them she had requested a DNA test. She held up the papers as evidence, stating clearly that according to these results, neither of them was her biological parent. Sarah glanced at the document, then at Prince Andrew, her face draining of color. Prince Andrew's composure cracked as he turned away, pressing a hand to his face. Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper, saying they had only been trying to protect her. She had been so young and the circumstances were complicated. They believed it was the best decision at the time. Beatrice responded with anguish and anger, demanding to know how letting her live her entire life based on a lie could possibly have been best. She told them they had let her build her entire existence on something false. Every smile, every memory, Every moment throughout her childhood and into adulthood had been built on a foundation of deception. The room filled with the sound of sobbing from multiple people, but no words could mend what had been broken by this revelation. Days later, after being discharged and returning home, Beatrice found the weight of knowing the truth was somehow heavier than the illness had been. One evening, she told Eduardo flatly that she was done. When he asked what she meant, she clarified she was done with the lies and the people who had maintained them. For 36 years, she had stood by her parents, defended them through numerous scandals, and carried their name proudly. They had hidden her true identity as if it meant nothing. Eduardo gently tried to offer perspective, reminding her that despite the circumstances of her birth, their love and the years spent raising her had been real. Those experiences should not be completely erased by this painful discovery, but Beatrice's mind appeared made up. She insisted that when trust was broken completely and fundamentally, there was no way to repair it. The revelation through medical testing had not only uncovered a long-held secret, but fractured family bonds that had seemed unshakable just months earlier. In that moment, sitting in her home with the truth finally revealed, walking away from the people who had raised her felt like the only response that made sense to her wounded heart.